Hi, this is Andrew Connell with Critical Path Training, and in this session I'm going to talk about the Silverlight portion of the Client Object Model. So the Silverlight Client Object Model is very much like the .NET Client Object Model, and it works basically the exact same way as the Silverlight Client Object Model does. What's nice about this is that you now have a way that we can go through and have something running on the client that's going to interact with SharePoint without having to go through and work with all the different web services there. This is going to give us the ability to create really rich and sophisticated SharePoint web applications. Now, what you're going to do when you want to create something in a Silverlight application, there's a lot of different things you can create. But like for instance, let's just talk a little bit about a web part. If I want to go through and create a Silverlight-based web part, I have a couple different options. I can first go through and create a Silverlight application, the ZAP file, that does whatever my business rules define. And then I can take that ZAP file and I can upload it to SharePoint. And that's kind of the wild card. I can do I can put it in lots of different places. And then I can either go create my own custom web part that then will load my ZAP file to maybe I want to go through and have a rich editing experience where people can go in and put like custom properties on there, and then I can pass those in using the init parameters piece on a Silverlight application. However, Microsoft does ship a Silverlight web part that simply takes one property, one parameter, and that's the URL of the ZAP file. So I don't really have to create a Silverlight web part per se. I can just create a Silverlight control or Silverlight application, the ZAP file, upload it to SharePoint, and then use the out-of-the-box Silverlight web part to show it. So where is the ZAP file? Where is he going to go? Well, the ZAP file, we have a bunch of different places we can put it. You could put it inside the layouts directory. That would be helpful if you have something that's what you want available to all the sites and all the site collections on a server and a farm, because then you just have one instance on the servers. But it's just, the only thing you need is just a URL to get to that ZAP file. So I could also take that ZAP file and I could load it to, say, a document library, and then get the URL of that ZAP file and plug it into any web part that is going to load ZAP file for us. So this is just a little picture here of what the Silverlight Client Object Model is going to look like. This guy is the code here that you see is very similar to the .NET Client Object Model. You're going to pass in the actual client context. So you have to define a client context first that's going to get a reference to the site that we're going to go through and we're going to talk to. And then I can just set up a bunch of additional stuff. So in this sample here, you can see I'm creating a list. And inside this list, I'm setting a title and a description of that list. And then I'm adding an item to that list and then saying, go through and execute this whole thing. The one thing that is a little different here is that I am going to go through and I need to work with I'm going to work with asynchronous programming here, because Silverlight is all the communications asynchronous. So I'm going to have to pass in a successful and a failure, a success and a failed callback that's going to happen when I run my Silverlight control. So now let's go jump into a demo and take a look at what a Silverlight web part is going to look like that uses the Client Object Model. So in this demo, I'm going to show you how to work with the Silverlight Client Object Model inside of, and leverage that in a Silverlight-based web part. So what I've done here is just create a standard Silverlight application inside of Visual Studio. There's nothing SharePoint really specific about it. I let it go through and create that web application test project to make my life a little bit easier in testing this. No, I don't have to test it inside of SharePoint. So what I did have to do, though, is I had to add references to the Silverlight Client Object Model. And you'll find these inside the Layouts Client bin directory. Again, just like the .NET Client Object Model, I have to specify the Client Object Model piece and the runtime, which handles all the transportation back and forth between the Client Object Model WCF service. So if we take a look at this code here, what I have here is I've gone through and inside the page, page XAML.cs here, all this is going to do is this is going to create a custom list for us. So I'm first going to go through and get a reference to on the client context, go through and get a reference to client context, and then I'm going to go through and fill out some information here to create a list. You can see that I'm using here this object called the list creation information to go specify the title, the description, what kind of a list we're going to create here, if I want on the quick launch or not. Then I can go through and just say, well, then go in and add the list in, right? Go through and add the list in. Notice, though, that it's not creating the list just yet. The list, I'm simply just registering it, say I want to go through and add this to the collection. The Client Object Model is batching up all the stuff that I've done so far. I haven't talked to SharePoint yet. I'm still working just inside of my Silverlight control. I'm then going through and getting a reference to the client information there, I'm then going and creating a new list item using the list item creation information object here in the client object model. And then I'm going to go through and write some stuff to that list item and add it to the list itself. Then when I've set up everything that I want to set up, I'm then going to call execute query. I'm then passing in 2 callbacks. And these little callbacks right here, all they're doing is just going through and doing standard asynchronous programming here with an anonymous delegate to go through and just say, what do I want to have happen here, like with the UI and stuff, okay? And then I'm passing in, well, what do I want to have happen here? Well, I want to say success or failure when this whole thing works, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over into SharePoint. I'm going to go into my shared documents library, and I'm going to upload my ZAP file. So I'm now going to go through and upload my ZAP file by going over to Documents and say I want to upload a document, and I'm going to find where that ZAP file is. So here's my Silverlight Client Object Model ZAP file. I'll then grab this file and upload it. There's my client object model. I'm then going to grab the URL of this guy. And then we're going to go to a standard SharePoint page and add a new web part to the page. So I'll switch over to page view and say I want to edit the page. I want to click, say, add a web part. And I'm now going to look for the Silverlight web part here, add him, and pass in the ZAP file URL. Go ahead and click OK, and I'm going to get out of edit mode, and there we go. Now I have my Silverlight ZAP file loading here. Now this guy's going to use the client object model. So what site do I want to go against? Well, I want to go against my site, and the list name will be First Silverlight OM announcements list. And I'll say go ahead and create the announcements list, and once it's created I can look at all site content here and I'll see First Silverlight OM announcements list. That was created nice and quick. All right, that's all there is to going through and working with the client object model with Silverlight. Just create a new Silverlight project, add these 2 references, and then you just have to go through and do the standard client object model programming here. Nothing really special. The only difference from the .NET one is that I do have to go through and work with asynchronous programming here because all the communication is done asynchronously. I have the same asynchronous capabilities though with SharePoint or with the .NET Client Object Model. The one thing too, just to point out here, is that all of the authentication is happening both with the .NET Client Object Model and with the Silverlight Client Object Model. All of the authentication is just being passed through. So all the information is being passed through that I'm currently logged in, and so it knows it's doing this under the context of the user I'm logged in as. However, there is a way to go through and to pass in like forms-based authentication to log into SharePoint so that the client program can be told how I want to go through and authenticate against SharePoint. And that's all defined very well in lots of detail in the SharePoint SDK.